How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Dante's Jungle, where we cover the latest care guides and information about exotic animals so that you can bring your pet into a loving and prepared home that's well equipped to give them the right environment to thrive and grow to their full potential. My name is Dante, this is Lucy the ball python, and today is a beautiful sunny day. Let's talk ball pythons. So, ball pythons, one of the most popular pet snake in the trade, and because of their popularity, they're very affordable and easy to find. But does that mean because of the affordability and ease of finding it, you can just go out and get it? No. They're not exactly a beginner snake. I would say they're an intermediate snake because unlike corn snakes and king snakes, they have a little bit of a more requirement than they do. They're amazingly beautiful snakes with different morphs and colors, and of course they are so big and impressive when they do, but not too big to not be able to handle them, but they're pretty impressive nonetheless. The males actually get to about 3 to 4 feet, while the females tend to get about to 4 to 5 feet, which are a bit larger in average, and of course they live for 20 years. So if you are looking to get a snake, a ball python, make sure you are up for the long run and you can take the responsibility to give this beautiful pet a good home. So let's talk about difficulties, but before we do, a little fun fact about these ball pythons. In the UK, they're actually called royal pythons because back in the day, African royalties used to wear these beautiful snakes, live pythons around their necks as accessories. Now, let's talk difficulties. The reason we say that they're a bit more difficult than corn snakes and king snakes or the usual beginner snake, because they need a higher humidity, and you need to be able to provide them this higher humidity to avoid them from having stuck shit or other health issues. But if you have the right information, if you're responsible, if you give them a really good home, they're wonderful snakes. And in my personal opinion, I love them so much more than corn snakes, because corn snakes tend to be a little skittish, jumpy, and like going around a little bit very fast. But these guys are chill, big, impressive, and they just hang out with you just like Lucy is doing with me right now. By the way, Lucy is 2 years old and he's a leucistic morph. Just to let you guys know, the snakes that you're going to be seeing today are sponsored by Brotherhood Reptiles, and also some of the tubs that we're going to show you how to make an enclosure are also provided by them. So thank you, Ayman, for that, and I'm going to put the details in the description in case you're in Malaysia and you want to purchase a snake or a reptile, or because you can get a very, very good experience with them. They'll tell you everything you need to know and walk you through the basics about it. So now that we've talked about that, let's get to a really fun part, and that's handling and their behavior. Handling your snake should be a positive experience for both you and the snake. So how do you handle a snake without stressing it out or making sure that it's having that positive experience? Before we get into that, 90% of the time when people are bitten by ball pythons, which is very rare, is because they were either handling food for the ball python before that, or they were trying to handle it when the snake was basically showing, where are you going? When the snake was clearly showing signs of stress. Now, to avoid that, make sure before handling your snake that you wash your hand completely, because snakes, they can smell the food and they're very food motivated, so they will associate your hand and the poor guy will end up biting your hand, which is not really its fault. All right? So when you're picking up your snake, make sure never to pick it up by its head and never to pick it up by its tail. These are the two parts that are delicate. When you are picking up your snake, make sure that you pick it up from the body and support the full weight of the snake. Come, baby. There we go. There we go, little girl. So Lucy is a 2-year-old snake, so she's much easier to handle because she's used to it. And as you can see, she's bringing the tongue out and she's kind of curious to see what's going on, so you know that she's not stressed. She's just looking around and exploring. Right? So to show you a little bit more about the snake behaviors and of course the body language, I'm going to bring another one of our snakes. She's a champagne morph and her name is Moet. So DK, can you hold Lucy for us? Thank you. And we're gonna bring in the champagne morph. So Moet is actually younger, and she might be a little bit more flighty or stressed out when you're handling it. We're not going to do it for too long. We're just going to experiment the different types of body language. A snake is very calm when it's hiding, when it's in plain sight and chilling. And the basic fact is that if you are handling a snake, if it tries to run away from you, hey baby, come. If it tries to run away from you, well, now she's calm. But anyway, if they try to like actively escape from you and try to like go away, that means they don't basically want to be there. See? It kind of feels like it's trying to go away. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to put it back in the cage so that we can put her back in the main enclosure that she belongs in. DK, can you help me with this one? Thank you so much. When the body language is for snakes, it's very important to realize that when a snake is coiled up, especially for ball pythons, if they're coiled up and they're pushing their body in, that means they don't want to be touched. Or of course, if they're hissing, that's even a better indicator that they don't want to be touched at that point. If you see your snake focused, calm down, and the head is kind of tilting to the back and the upper body is kind of in an S shape, we'll put a picture right up here so you can see that. That means the snake is ready to strike. That's a positive thing when you're feeding the snake, but of course, if you see the snake showing that behavior when you're handling it, try not to. Leave the snake alone. It's stressed. You don't want to stress it even more. All right? That being said, now we can actually move on to show you what type of enclosure you can keep for your snake so that it feels right at home and in the best and well-equipped environment that it should be in. Enclosures, your pet's home, where it's going to be living majority of its lifetime and it's going to grow and thrive in there. So you want to make sure that you give it the best equipment that it needs, the right parameter, and everything that you require so that the snake feels comfortable. Now today we're also going to talk about the controversy between housing your snakes in a tub or a glass enclosure. But before that, let's talk about setting up your snake enclosure, talk about heating and humidity as well. Now you know that snakes are cold-blooded animals, so they're ectotherms. They cannot regulate their body temperature like we do. So in that case, we actually need a hot side and a cool side in your enclosure so that it can thermoregulate and go from hot side to the cool side whenever it wants to. So what we're going to do is that we're going to make sure that the heating comes from the bottom, because they tend to like heating that comes from beneath more than, if you put on a light or a heat emitter or something like that. Especially for tubs, you don't want to do that because there could be a possibility that it'll melt the top of the tub or bin. So that being said, the best heating element, in my opinion, would be a heating pad or one of those heating wires that you can use for racks. So what you're going to be doing is, first off, you're going to take your tub, you're going to take the heating pad and attach it to the bottom of the tub. Do not put it inside the enclosure. You don't want to get your pet burned. And do not, I cannot stress this enough, do not use heat rocks. Heat rocks are a terrible product that have come to the reptile hobby, and they have injured so many different animals. So stay away from heat rocks and do not buy anything from anybody that gives you the opinion of you should have a heat rock in your enclosure. So have a heat pad under your tank or your tub, and of course, very, very, very important to attach it to a thermostat. You can buy these at any place. If you're in another country, you can buy it from Amazon. If you're in Malaysia, you can get it from Shopee or Lazada. It's very cheap, and it's going to save your animal, because these heat pads, they don't have a dial for you to put what temperature you're going to be in. So this device actually has a probe. The probe goes inside the enclosure. It knows what temperature it is in. You set the temperature, the highest temperature that you want the basically the heat pad to turn off. It'll show the temperature, you set it up, and anytime that the enclosure is getting too much heat, it'll turn it off automatically and bring it back on automatically when it needs. All right, so that being said, for the heating, for the cool side, you need an ambient temperature for between 80 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and make sure you do not go below 75 degrees. For the hot side, you have to have a temperature between 88 to 92. So put your heating pad on one side of the enclosure beneath so that becomes your hot side. Now, because they have need a requirement for a higher humidity, which is about 50 to 60%, you're going to need a substrate that can hold moisture and humidity inside. So in this case, I'm using cocoa peat. You can use cocoa fiber or husk, anything that can hold moisture but doesn't stay wet for a very long period, because if your snake is continuously going and slithering around in a wetland, it can actually develop skin rot. So you want to avoid that. What you do is you put in the substrate, you take a mister and you start to mist the substrate and the walls to keep the humidity in. A good part of having a tub is because it actually keeps the moisture in much better. Now we're trying to make one part a little bit more moisture than the other side, because of course, again, you want to give your pet a choice between too humid and less humid. Humidity is very important. Hydration is very important for your snake, because especially for when they are shedding, so you want to make sure that they have the right humidity. Use a hygrometer. You can use a digital one. In my opinion, digital ones are much better. Use a premium one. You want to make sure that you know exactly the parameters in your tank, so to avoid any kind of accident or something like that. And of course, don't make it too humid or too cold, because they will end up having respiratory infections. So that's very important. Now for the hot side, we're going to be using a hide, because snakes actually love to go in really tight spaces and just chill inside there. It makes them feel safe. So you want to actually give them one hide on the hot side. And then, of course, and here's a surprise. Hi, Lucy. So you see, it actually loves to go and hide into that. So we're gonna use this hide for the cool side of the tank, and for the for the drinking water, you want to make sure that every single day you change the water and give it fresh drinking water, and give it a bowl that is big so that the snake can actually go into it and soak, because they like doing that, especially during shedding time. So put that right there, fill it up with some water, and then right there. And you also want to give it some foliage. Yes, it's true that most ball pythons are actually not arboreal, but giving them the option of doing so actually is better for them, so you can also see them moving around and having more activity. So we're just going to put this beautiful fig plant in there. I'm not a big fan of fig plants, but of course in this in this side we're going to be using that because it's a tub setup, and we want to do a very simple setup in that sink. In this tub, I'm going to be putting in champagne, the champagne morph, which is, her name is Moet. And of course, we're going to put the probe in there as well on the hotter side, so that we can make sure that it doesn't get too hot. And you're basically done. But of course, for the heating, I think the best thing that you can do is get a digital heat probe and a digital hygrometer, so that the thermometer and hygrometer on both sides can actually tell you what the temperature or humidity is on both sides as well. So that being said, you could also have a heat gun, so that you can go through different sides of your tank just to see what the what the temperature is on that side. And we're basically done with setting up this simple and very good enclosure. Now let's talk about the difference between using a tub and using a glass. And basically, in my opinion, there's not much of an advantage or disadvantage. It basically is how you make it work. For tubs, if you provide them with holes in the sides, you put them a few holes, and depending on the level of humidity that is in there, you can add more holes, or if you've added too many holes, you can actually put a strip of just a strip on it, so that it doesn't give out too much of the humidity. So The good thing about the tubs is that they keep in humidity, as I've mentioned before, but with the glass enclosures, because they have these screen tops, they tend to not hold it as well, but no issue with that because you can actually put on top of them a wet towel, not a wet towel, a damp towel, or aluminum foils that can help keep in that humidity inside the enclosure as well. Basically, there are other types of enclosures which are melamine and PVC. They hold humidity perfectly, and at the same time they look great. And if you're in Malaysia, there's actually MSXO World, which we're going to put the type of enclosures that they have and also the contact details down there. So if you want to, get a beautiful melamine enclosure, you can actually contact them, MSXO World. Or you can also try to find a PVC enclosures, which if you're in Malaysia, it's a bit harder to find, but no worries for anybody outside of Malaysia. I'm going to put the Amazon link for those, enclosures as well, so you can actually go and check them out, all right? So we're done with the part of talking about the enclosures for the time being. When it comes to the size, you wanna make sure any snake that you're keeping, the sum of the length of the tank plus the width of the tank should always be bigger than the full length of the snake or adult snake. In my personal opinion, I would like to have a tank that is the same size or bigger than the snake in terms of length as well. So that's definitely your choice, but of course in both cases the snakes will thrive, but they'll have a bit more room to wiggle around and be happy if you give them a bigger enclosure. For ball pythons, males, try to get a minimum 50-gallon tank for adults and 75 gallons for females. That being said, this is the last part of our enclosure, so let's move on to the next segment. So you want to get your snake now. Where do you go? Who do you get it from? That's an important question. So you want to make sure that you find a breeder or a reptile seller that is reputable and that they have a good service, so you have a good experience, a positive experience with them. If you have any questions about the breed you want to ask, they can actually answer you without any problem. And you can ask a lot of questions. How's the feeding habit? What does it eat? And so on and so forth. And also, very, very, very important is that the snake has license. In Malaysia, your seller needs to have a wildlife department license to be able to sell the snake to you. If you don't have a license for your snake, you can be, you can face a penalty of up to 100,000 ringgit. In other countries, same things could be possible. So you want to make sure that your beautiful snake, which is now trying to explore the bottom side of the table, is at a very is taken from a very good and reputable breeder or seller. And you want to make sure to check exactly how healthy the snake is. So how do you do that? There are a few criteria that you need to check out when you're buying your snake. Number one, you want to make sure it has a weight to it. Ball pythons are a bit more girthy and bigger, so you want to make sure it has a good weight to it and is not an anorexic. The next phase would be to check the vent. Basically, the vent would be somewhere right here, as you can see it. Right there next to his face. Sorry, I put your butt next to your face. So you want to make sure that there's no prolapse, there's nothing weird sticking out, and you want to ask questions when you do see it to make sure that that's normal. All right, the next one would be to check the eyes to see that they're the same size and to see if the snake was kept and was well hydrated. How you can see that is basically to check all over the skin and make sure there's no stuck shed or any kind of shedding stuck on the snake. And you want to check to see if there's any kind of bubbling around the mouth, which could be an indication of respiratory infection. Check out everything on your snake, make sure everything is good, and also check for mites. Mites are basically kind of like a flea for snakes, but you want to make sure there's no mites on it because they actually can carry sicknesses and things like that, and it could spread to other enclosures if you have more snakes. So make sure that your snake is healthy and comes from a reputable, good breeder, has a license, especially in Malaysia. Make sure it has a wildlife department license. And if all is well, you're good to go. You can take that beautiful snake and make sure you've already set up the enclosure at home, waiting for it ready. Don't buy the snake impulsively, bring it home, and then think about what you have to do for the enclosure. Always be prepared before you take the snake home. That's the most important thing for any animal. Be prepared, know that you are committed and responsible for the long term, because like I said before, these snakes live for 20 years. So you should be committed, and also find a good exotic vet. You want to make sure you find an exotic vet veterinarian out there, and you have the number right on speed dial, so that if anything, God forbid, if anything happens to your snake, you can take it to the vet immediately. That being said, if you have all these checked, you're good to go. Now, we're going to talk about food. So what do I feed my snake? That's a very important question. A lot of people think that you should be feeding them live rodents, but that's not necessarily the case, especially if you're not okay with feeding them live animals. I personally am not. So the best case, and it's veterinarian approved, is that you can feed them frozen thawed rats. Why do I say not mice or mouse? Is because if you start them from the, where do you think you're going? If you start them from the beginning with rats, smaller rats, you can actually move them into larger rats anyway. But if you start with mice, you have to wean them out from mice to rats, and that's a little bit of a process. If you don't want to go through that, you can start with feeding them rats from the get-go. All right. The second reason for the basic reason for why you shouldn't be feeding, your snakes live rats is because, well, the cruelty part of it, which, I mean, that's a personal factor in my case. I don't want to do that. And the other one would be that if you leave the rat inside the enclosure, or when the snake bites it, there could be a possibility that the rat will try to defend itself and ends up biting the snake, injuring the animal, and that's not very good. And at the same time, if you want to keep live rats, you gotta have another enclosure for them. If you don't want to do that, you can actually get frozen thawed rats and just chuck them in the freezer. They're cleaner, and they come from good breeders and providers, so it should be okay. And aside from that, I think if you want to know the exact schedule of your snake from the get-go, if you're getting it from a reputable breeder or a shop, check with them about the schedule for the feeding. And when you do feed your snake, make sure to leave it alone for a while, like a few days, just to let it to digest and stay calm as it is. And then when it's digested, when the big ass poop comes out, then you can actually go and play with it again. But remember, like I told you in the handling, don't handle for too long. 15 minutes is a good time, or keep them around your neck if they're comfortable for doing that. That being said, let's jump over to talk about morphs and different types of snakes, and basically what your favorite type is going to be. So you want to know which type of variety or morph or genetic mutation of the ball python you want to keep as a pet, or you want to purchase from your reptile shop or breeder. Now there's a lot of different morphs of these beautiful snakes, and sometimes you tend to go on there and you see hypo this and head that, and you're wondering, if you're a beginner, what are these? So I'm gonna tell you guys. So hypo basically means hypomelanistic, which actually goes to mean that the amount of black or darker pigmentation in the animal is less. So the amount of melamins is less. Het, in the other hand, means heterogeneous. Let's do an example. If you have an albino snake, both the parents have at least one or two traits that create an albino animal. So if you can see up there, albino plus albino equals albino. Now, what if you have an albino snake and then you mate it with a snake that looks like a wild type, and then you get an albino? Then you know that the other snake, the wild type, which you can see up there, actually has heterogeneous or is het albino. Now, you can also get albino snakes if both your wild type or any other morph has the albino trait. So if you have two hets, you can still get an albino. all right? Now I'm gonna put on the side here, and the other side as well, because there's a lot of them, a few of the different types of morphs that are available for ball pythons. And of course, if you're looking to check out the availabilities, if you're in Malaysia, you can already check the description there, and there is a contact for Brotherhood Reptiles. They have beautiful, healthy, and licensed snakes. You can go through them and you can talk to Iman and choose which snake that you're going to have for the long run. If you're not in Malaysia, you can check with your breeders or reputable pet shops, reptile shops, and check if they have any availability for different types of morphs. It doesn't matter what your snake looks like. These animals are beautiful specimens, and even the wildlife, the normal types, they look gorgeous. They look beautiful. The patterns are very beautiful, and in the end of the day, it matters that the snake comes to a good home and it thrives because it is given a good home and everything that it needs. So put the main priority to giving your pet a good home instead of looking for the variations. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you liked the video and you've learned something from it. If you did, please press the like button and subscribe button down there and share it with your other friends that want to know about ball pythons. And if you press the subscribe button, make sure to press the alert button as well, because we're going to have a lot of other videos coming up with different animals, exotic animals, going from beginner level care to master level care. And we're going to feature to make sure that anyone that wants to buy any of these beauties can actually bring them to a better home and into a home that they'll thrive in the long run. Also, thank you to Brotherhood Reptiles for sponsoring these beautiful animals, and also some of the equipment that we used in this video, and also to my team behind the camera for being so awesome and, you know, going with the whole snake thing, because some of them are still afraid of snakes. Sending you guys a lot of love, and I hope to see you guys again very soon. Take care and keep herping. By the way, Ali, I know you're a little bit scared, well, not a little bit, scared of snakes. Do you want to actually check it out? Oh my God!